Hello and welcome back. I'm Natalie MacDonald and you're watching Sydney Direct on Dukascopy TV, where we take a look at some of the hot topics impacting Australian markets. Well, that unemployment figure came in at a steady 6.2%, meaning that the federal government under Malcolm Turnbull's leadership has inherited a stagnant labour market. So what next, and what role is the Australian dollar playing in all of this? Well, I spoke to Chief Economist of Urbis, Nicki Hutley, to find out her thoughts. Nicki Hutley, always a pleasure to see you again. Welcome back to Dukascopy TV.
Thank you for having me.
No worries at all. Now, before we get sort of in depth, can you firstly, what's your outlook on the Australian economy at the moment?
Look, I think we're in a very unusual position in that it's very finely balanced at the moment. And I think, as our Deputy Governor pointed out the other day, we're probably overly pessimistic given that we do have growth continuing, but it's that sluggish 2% growth, and Australians don't really do well with only 2%. So we've got housing, we've got a bit of retail, we've got some underpinnings, but we're really lacking that long-term investment, and we're really struggling with what is Australia's economic identity over the medium term. So we're okay, but we're not doing brilliantly, which leaves us finally poised if something goes wrong overseas that, we are a little bit vulnerable. But luckily, unlike most economies, we've still got a bit of room on the interest rates and certainly with fiscal strategy if things were to slow down a bit from here.
One of those economic traits, I suppose we can call them, that Australia is carrying at the moment is that labour market. Now, Tony Abbott, our former PM here, made a big pledge to try and improve unemployment rates, to improve job creation. And that's a pledge really the current Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull is now sort of stuck with. But that unemployment rate sticking at that steady 6.2%, there's a lot of work, it seems, still to be done.
Look, there is, and look, every Prime Minister promises this and every government, and to some extent the natural rate of population growth delivers some productivity that then delivers further growth and employment opportunities. So it's a question of actually, there is employment growth there. It's a question of how fast it's growing in relation to the population and also the willingness to participate in the workforce, and those things in combination will determine where your unemployment rate is. So we actually, if you look at the job ads data, if you look at where participation rates are, our labour market is not doing too badly considering growth is reasonably sluggish at that 2%, and all the forward indicators suggest that it actually will improve a little bit at least over the year ahead, but it probably needs a little bit more of a boost and a push in the short term just to get it back to more comfortable levels.
Is the federal opposition onto something with their push towards infrastructure financing and investment that they've sort of been calling of late?
Look, I think they are onto something, and obviously that would go a long way towards improving the labour market situation. In fact, I think the research that they've done suggests that you might get, in the short term at least, a couple of 100,000 jobs that as a result of investing in new infrastructure. And also investing in infrastructure creates longer term economic opportunities, which again helps the employment situation. You've got to say, well, one of the big sticking points, if we all know how wonderful infrastructure is for the long term economy, why aren't governments investing in more? And of course the answer is fiscal constraints. And we've seen in New South Wales, where we've had a lot more revenue from stamp duty sales, a strong property market, that is being reinvested, and it does have a positive both for sentiment and for actual economic activity. But for where its economies, state or federal, are not so strong, we've got to look at getting more finance from the private sector. And unfortunately, in the past, our experience has been absolutely terrible. If you look at all of the cross-city tunnels and those examples, we haven't got it right. That doesn't mean we can't get it right. And the idea that you do robust, independent cost, benefit and financial analyses so that when superannuation funds, for example, want to invest, which they do in these sorts of projects, then they're investing in the right ones that are what the country needs, and also that will give a reasonable return to the investors.
Another one of those underlying sort of issues I want to touch upon was the Aussie dollar. Now, we've seen some real wild swings actually in the local currency. Is this sort of par for the course for the Australian dollar and its long-term shift downwards, or is the dollar fighting back?
Look, I think it's actually a little bit of both of those issues. I think everyone believes that the Aussie is definitely headed for a somewhat lower trajectory given what's happened to commodity prices. But there's also a little bit of uncertainty, and that volatility a lot of it is in relation to what's going on in China, because we know that has a huge implication, or is the key driver of where big commodity prices, particularly the bulk commodities, which are so important for Australia, are going. And because we're seeing that data go up and down, and is growth really slowing? We don't don't know whether the GDP numbers are real or not. Some of the leading indicators are suggesting it's a lot softer. So there's a lot of uncertainty. So I think when the dollar moves too sharply lower, we see a little bit of a bounce back, but the overall trend at the moment is definitely lower, and overall that'll be good for the Aussie economy.
Nicki, many thanks for the update.
You're very welcome.
Our thanks, as always, to Nicki Hutley at Urbis for her comments. I'll be back soon with plenty more exclusive interviews for you. For now, though, it is goodbye.